Welcome to What's Your Next Move, the podcast for peak performers who are making things happen but are running into roadblocks that prevent them from getting what they want. Whether you work for someone else, you're an entrepreneur, thinking about starting your own business, or at a point in your life where you just can't make the move from where you are to where you want to go, you're in the right place. This podcast is all about answering one question: what's your next move? And helping you harness your power so your next move is the one that changes your life. I'm your host and resident provocateur, Arlene Battisil, and I want to know, what's your next move? Hi there, I'm Arlene Battisil, your host and resident provocateur, and I am very happy to have my dear friend Nick Elvery on the show today. He's got an extraordinary story that he's going to share with you, and it's one of these really remarkable cases of how somebody goes from one point in their life following a major transition or life change into creating a tremendous success for themselves. So, Nick, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Well, thank you for having me on, Arlene. I'm really looking forward to this.
That's brilliant. And I'm sure you can now tell, since Nick has spoken, he is from the UK. Nick, you're in London, right?
About an hour west currently, yeah.
Beautiful. That's excellent. So, you know what, Nick? Instead of me saying anything about you, I will turn it over to you and ask you to just talk to me a little bit about what you're doing in your life right now, and then we will shift gears into talking about that major life change in a moment.
Perfect. Thank you. So just to give a little understanding of what I do, I'm a peak performance coach, and I basically turn entrepreneurs into superhuman productivity machines. And that's effectively using everything I've learned over the years, being a personal trainer, being in the biohacking world, having a passion for nutrition, fitness, and personal development since I was about 15, 16 years old. And obviously what we're going to discuss today is basically about my story. So to give people who are listening a little bit of an understanding, I spent about 12 to 13 years addicted to hard drugs and alcohol, starting at around the age of sort of 15, 16, and just watched my life crumble and watched the relationships around me get destroyed. And over that period of time, just watched everything that I wanted to happen fall apart. And, it sort of ended up spending time in Cambodia doing crystal meth and having bike chases with crystal meth dealers and all sorts of incredible stories that sort of come through from that experience. And I'm looking forward to sharing what's happened and what happened through that experience, and also like what's happening now with me and the transition I made, because over 6 years, just coming up 6 years ago, I left that world behind and started creating a life that I loved, which is ultimately what I'm interested in doing, is creating a life for me and for my clients and for people, anyone that I interact with, helping people get the life that they want. So that's a really quick, in a nutshell, sort of 15 years of my life, or a little bit more now. Yeah.
Holy cow. I don't even know where to start. I mean, I've been making notes here and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is so rich. And what's so remarkable is I'm picturing you as I know you today as my friend, and knowing what you do for a living and how successful you are. And then you tell this story. You being in Cambodia with crystal meth people, nobody does things like that. Who does that? Who has a life that has something like that? So I think this is going to be really fascinating. But it's really interesting that you talk about the addiction starting when you were 15 or 16, and I'm going to want to delve into that at some length here. But why don't you talk to me, as is always the case on the show, about the kind of major life change or transition that you went through and what your next move was? And I think that the setup to all of this is, how did you end up making the decision that going the path of the drugs was what you needed to be doing? What happened before that started? And then take me through what happened after.
So, it all started fairly innocently, I suppose, when I think I was about 13, with smoking cigarettes with a group of friends, and it was very much a sort of classic male trying to show off in front of friends and look cool in front of people. That's where it all started, and then as time went on, the smoking and the drinking was the next thing. I always look quite old for my age, and back in those days we could get fake IDs very easily. So drinking in pubs at sort of 13, 14 years old was fairly normal. And it just started from there, really. And then moving on, it got into, sort of at school at the age of around 15, 16, smoking weed, smoking hash. And it just sort of went on from there. And I think one of the core things, I was actually on an interview this morning on a different podcast talking about a very similar subject. And one of the things that was highlighted was the bravado and the ego and the trying to show off to other people was always present for me. And I think that was one of the big drivers and catalysts for taking the next step and going, in the next level of drug taking, because I was known as someone that could take quite a lot and handle my, the substances, and that became quite a pivotal. It just played a really big part in my ego and sort of increasing the levels of drugs that we took. And I was known as the one that had all the drugs and was the person to hang around, which is interesting, and we'll probably get more into it. But the face and the mask of the person I presented to the world and the reality of what was actually going on inside, and especially behind closed doors when I was on my own, were two very different worlds. I'm sure we'll get into more about that within the conversation.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about that. Now, this is an unusual beginning, because usually when I talk with people on the show, they have gone through something that was quite traumatic. And either it was something that they chose, meaning you make a change in your job, which can be traumatic. It's not the way we typically think of trauma, but a big life change like that does constitute a form of trauma. And so here you find yourself in, on a trajectory where you're having to do more and more, because it's all part of this mask that you're wearing, and you're getting all kinds of feedback and reinforcement for what you're doing. And so the whole thing is ramping up. And this entire period, as I hear you talk about it, really sounds to me like that whole period was the life change for you because of what ultimately happened as a result of this. And so when you talk about the mask, and, anytime someone's wearing a mask, it means that they're hiding something or hiding from something. And if you're comfortable sharing that with me, can you go ahead and talk about that? What was behind the mask? Because usually when people are wearing a mask, they're trying to hide some kind of pain that they're experiencing, because it's that pain that motivates them to do the things that they're doing. So talk to me a bit about that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And it was always hiding from, I always wanted to fit in. That was the key underlying tone of everything that I did. It was about fitting in, being the part, and wanting to be liked, Mm-hmm. And I likened myself, I suppose, to like a chameleon, of blending in and changing color and fitting the environment. And that's pretty much what my mask was always about. I would have multiple masks to try and fit into what I think people thought, what I thought people thought I wanted to be. How I could come across and please them. So just being what I thought people wanted me to be, rather than being my true self, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Now the people that you're talking about, were these your peers, or was this something going on in your family?
My peers. I think that'd be accurate for sure.
Okay. And then, anybody who is really invested in wanting to be liked, there's usually something underlying that. And for all of us, all this stuff traces back to, the relationship that we've had with our parents and our family members and so forth. And can you just talk a little bit about the relationship you had with your family?
Sure. It's worth noting that my dad had MS, well, throughout my entire life, but it got a lot worse as life progressed, and that definitely played a big part in the role of hiding from life. I didn't want to watch my dad deteriorate as I did, over the years, and eventually passed away 5-6 years ago now. And watching him go through what he went through was soul destroying, and not only for just watching what he went through, but also the effect that it had on my mum and the family and everything else. So there was always this element of wanting to escape. And it's interesting because it wasn't what started my journey, but it definitely catalyzed it. It helped it. It fueled it, if you like, as time went on.
Right. And how did your dad having MS manifest itself in your family in a way that had such a tremendous impact on you?
I think it was seeing someone that you cared so much about going from being someone very able, skiing. He was one of the best in his company for what he did. He an incredible electrical engineer. He, built the entire plumbing and electrics for mum and dad's first house and so many other things. So watching someone going from being incredibly capable and enjoying life to not being able to fend for himself is a horrible thing to witness, especially when it's someone that you love dearly. So I think really that played a huge part in, but also, as I said, watching my mum's life suffer from it as well, because ultimately she had to look after him, and we were very lucky with having carers and helpers to be able to take certain parts of his life, help him with certain parts of his life. But ultimately, it's soul destroying to see someone that you love so much go from being this capable person to not being able to fend for himself,
Right, absolutely. And so deeply painful. And so this was all happening when you were fairly young, right?
Yeah. So, I suppose as we got older, his health deteriorated. So, I think from sort of around 15 or 16 or thereabouts, it started to become apparent that it was starting to affect him. And each year that each year that went on, it became more and more apparent that it was causing, it was affecting him even more.
Right. And as a younger person, and even as a child, as you were watching this going on, watching, this person that you clearly had a beautiful relationship with and loved him and he loved you, and then seeing the impact on your mom, did you ever find yourself behaving in ways that were designed to, create as little impact or demand as possible because you saw what was happening and that the needs were so great that you felt it was important for you to not really make any demands of your own?
No, I was a fucking nightmare, to be honest. It's the only real way of looking at it.
What kind of fucking nightmare were you, Nick?
Well, I was the classic. I've never liked authority. I was the classic, the class clown. Always wanting to be center of attention. Never took things very seriously. If I could find an opportunity to misbehave, I would take that opportunity. And that's who I have been for a long, long time. I've always had this passion for wanting to build businesses and be entrepreneurial. And the first soiree into entrepreneurship was selling cigarettes. At school we used to be able to get the white filtered ones, and which were exactly the same products as the normal English ones, but because they had white filters, we could double the price. So it was always I always had an interest and a passion for this. Unfortunately, my route went down the route of selling things, and eventually selling drugs to the sixth form at college, and got expelled for that. And that's sort of where my route went. So instead of channeling my energies and my efforts into positive routes. It was always about what can I do to make money, but have a mischievous sort of the naughty side of it, if you like. Right. So yeah, it's always gone down that route.
And so that's it. Sounds like that's how you were behaving outside the home. Were you doing the same thing inside the home?
I try to keep things away from them. But, I wouldn't. It's an interesting question, actually. Got me thinking. I don't really have an answer for that. But I think what you're alluding to is because of everything that was going on, did I change my behavior within the family relationship to avoid adding extra stress? And I think the answer is no, because ultimately, if that was the case, then I probably wouldn't have done drugs and all the things that came with it. Knowingly in front of my parents, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I just think that it's interesting that you were having the experience that you did inside your home. And there's so much stress associated with anyone in a household having some type of a physical or other type of illness, and how that manifests and how it affects all the people in the environment. And then you go out into the world and you're rebellious and you're mischievous and you're doing all of these things. And, I was just wondering whether or not there was any connection to how you, had as a child had to pretty much accommodate the kind of situation that was taking place in your house and the tremendous emotions that you were having. And the only channel or outlet for it was what ended up happening outside the walls of your home and leading to this place of you being rebellious. And I love that you had discovered at such an early age that you could take a look at two different cigarettes and figure out you could charge more for one of them just because of how it looks. I mean, that is so rich.
Yeah, it was I enjoyed that very much. I remember we went to America on a ski trip many years ago now, and at those times you could, I think it was 200 cigarettes per boarding pass. And I remember coming back to the lady, asking the lady at the duty free, saying, well, in theory, if I come back with 30 boarding passes, can you give me 30 cartons of 200 cigarettes each? And she said, well, of course I can. So I went round all of our friends, because we were on a big ski trip, and came back with as many boarding passes as I could get, slapped them down on the desk, and then bought a whole however many boarding passes. I don't remember the exact amount now, but yeah, it's always been sort of an instinct within me to want to go down that sort of entrepreneurial route, for sure.
Oh my God, that is you are fucking brilliant. I love that story so much. This is something I'm never going to forget. And so I'm just curious, there you are in high school and you clearly have this entrepreneurial bent. Do you feel that you had that inclination really, really early on in your life, even as early as 4 or 5 when you first started school?
Do you know, I didn't have the classic lemonade stand, to use an American reference. I didn't ever have any sort of very young entrepreneurial enterprises in that respect. So no is the short answer. I think the first, the cigarettes were probably the first attempt at entrepreneurship, probably at the age of around 13, 14. So nothing as young as what you were describing, but yeah, about 13 or 14 is probably the first time.
Oh my God, that is so magnificent. And so you're now in a place where you're starting to discover the world of being an entrepreneur, and it's very early and you're having success at it. You're figuring out different ways of doing things and you're seizing the moment and the opportunities that have presented themselves to you. And this is where the question of what's your next move? What was your next move? Because obviously at that point, and going further into high school, you're having the experience of being an entrepreneur and you still have all these things going on at home. And your choice is to go full on into the world of being an entrepreneur and building, or the path that you ultimately took, which was to go down the path of the drugs and then into the addiction. And so tell me about the point in time where something happened that then said, I'm just going to go do this thing. And I know you said at the outset, it was very much motivated by your relationship to your peers, where you were getting feedback. Everyone had this perception of you. You wanted everybody to like you and so forth. And instead of that finding its way into the world of being an entrepreneur and how you could have met all of your needs in that way, why did you make the choice? Why was your next move to go down this other path?
Well, it's interesting because there was still an entrepreneurial level to it, because it was just drug related. We knew a lot of people. We could get a lot of things, and a big part of the ego that was created, or I created for myself, was being known as the person that could get whatever you needed. And that very much continued the theme around entrepreneurship, but in a very negative, in a very negative way. So it was always a theme running in the background. And I want to make it really clear that there wasn't much success. Like, being a drug addict and trying to run entrepreneurial ventures of any type are not a good combination. Trying to be successful and having an incredibly difficult habit is not a good combination, as I said. And we'll probably get onto this more, but I had multiple businesses over the years, and they all failed because ultimately trying to run a business is challenging, and build any form of entrepreneurial venture is difficult. But when you couple that with trying to, dealing with being a full-blown addict and alcoholic, it's almost impossible. And so the success I had of selling white tip cigarettes at school was probably the first and last for a very, very long time throughout my life. And once it got into the side of the world of drugs, then I was using way more than I was ever selling. Mm-hmm. And it was only really, the entrepreneurial route through that was only really to supply myself with as much as I could possibly get my hands on.
Right.
So it's been an interesting synergy between the entrepreneurship and the addiction. But as I say, it's not a very good strategy to try, to being an addict and trying to run a business. Well,
there are many ways to go about being an entrepreneur, and you certainly chose an interesting one. Now, Nick, I'm curious about one thing, and that is, as I hear you talking, there had to have been a lot of ego gratification that came from you being the guy that basically could get the job done and had the goods, and, people see a person in that role in a very specific way. And in a sense, they're quite powerful in the eyes of their peers. Would you say that's fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And I played on that for sure.
So I'm curious about something. When you talked about watching what happened to your dad over time, and here he was in the eyes of a young person, a very powerful man, and his health declining and deteriorating pretty dramatically over time, do you think that there was a need for you to be as strong as possible so that there wasn't any relationship between you and, I guess, perceived weakness? Is there anything to that?
It's a good question. I'm having to think about that one. So effectively you're saying, because of the situation I was going through with my father and the family, have I tried to create a character or a persona that can deal with those things or become strong? And yeah, I see what you're saying. So using the ego-driven character of being someone who's known for being able to get stuff or do things or make things happen in that way, was that to counteract the family relationship and the things that are going wrong? Is that what you're saying? Have I misinterpreted that?
That's spot on. Absolutely. In a way, it's suggesting that, this might be a stretch, but it's almost a way of coping with the reality of what was happening with your dad and the pain that you were experiencing around what was happening to him, and seeing him go through this decline, that a way that you might have chosen to cope with it. And certainly this wouldn't be a conscious choice you would make. It would be something that's happening subconsciously because it's a way of controlling things in a situation that may feel out of control. And so you go in a direction of ensuring that you are strong, because if your dad couldn't be strong, you were going to have to be the strong person because having that weakness was too threatening. And maybe that's a complete stretch, but I am curious about that.
Yeah, I think what I would say to that is I don't know about that specific angle, but I do think, or I do know that the drugs were most certainly an escape from the reality that I didn't want to face. That's definitely true. I think the persona or the character I created just fueled the personality that I am. I do like to be center of attention. I do have a big ego, which can sometimes needs to be put in check. And, it played to the traits that I was given from birth, if you like, or just my personality. That has changed over the years, and through meditation and through a lot of the strategies that I teach my clients and I use on myself on a daily basis, then I have started to create some subconscious changes and changes to my own personality. So it's a lot less these days, but it most certainly was an escape, that's for sure.
Right. And when you were deep into the addiction, talk to me about the experience of escape, because I've never been one to even dabble in drugs. And so I don't have any frame of reference for what that must have been like or what that feels like. My instincts suggest to me that when a person is doing this, they do have that feeling of escape. But then when the high wears off, they're still left with the reality of the situation. And so talk to me about the experience of you using to the extent that you were and for as many years as you did, and this whole relationship to escaping. Was it the continued usage was just designed to extend the length of time that you could escape?
Absolutely. It's the best way to describe it is just numbing your senses, just like one would take a painkiller to dull the activity of the nerves. The sensitivity of the nerves is exactly the same as taking a painkiller for your body, for your mind, and it's just a way of taking. When you're messed up on drugs, you're not thinking about the things that are going on at home. You're in that moment, and it's interesting because as the years progressed, the flavor of the relationship with the drugs, if you like, changed. And initially there was a lot of fun and entertainment, and people having friends of ours just joking around with each other and playing games and all that. And it sort of moved to the club scene, where we're taking a lot of ecstasy every weekend in London, and each time it progressed and got slightly the drugs got slightly harder and the experiences got slightly darker, and it sort of moved on, sort of year by year. So it's, to answer your question, it's just simply to numb the senses. And on the interview that I had this morning, it was said that when you give up drugs and give up alcohol and all those sort of things, it's like having your skin removed, because you're very sensitive to life. You're coming back into life and coming back into the idea of what, the real world is. And it's terrifying initially, that's for sure.
Oh my God. I want to follow up on this very much so, this whole idea of being sensitive to life. But I want to ask you first, were you involved in any relationships with anyone during the time that you were addicted to the drugs?
A few, not many. And I do wonder how people even put up with me. I really do. So there were a few relationships, and none of them lasted particularly long. Just like most of the jobs that I had in my life,
right?
All very fleeting, and quite understandably so. I don't know how anyone put up with me at all, if I'm completely honest.
And so in terms of the work that you were doing as the years were progressing, were you just moving from one job to the next, sort of moving aimlessly through life?
Absolutely.
Or were you doing and were all the jobs, the taking of them, the having of them, the being in them, all for the purpose of having enough money to buy more drugs? and support the habit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one thing they say about addicts is if they put their energy and time and effort and resources into positive things in the way that they did for getting drugs, then anything can be achieved. The lengths that I would used to go to get drugs were insane. And implying if you can employ any of those techniques into something else, then you could be very successful. So yeah, I mean, it's I left school at sort of around 17, 18 and went straight to work, just doing odd jobs. I remember I was cold calling, selling double glazing was one of my first jobs, and it was the most soul destroying job on the planet. I've been in recruitment, I've been in IT, I've been in sales, I've been a white van driver, I've worked in pubs, I've worked in clubs, you name it, I probably had 5 minutes doing it at one point. And it was all in search, it always has been in search of doing something that I'm really passionate about and I really enjoy. And that's never stopped. There's always been that underlying theme. And that was, why those sort of 5 to 6 businesses I ran, all that failed, were all on that journey. And I'm still on that quest today, really, and I love what I do now. And I really enjoy the experience of being able to help people and bettering myself and doing all the things that I do, with the podcast and everything else. And that's pretty much it.
Right. Well, let's talk for a second to move the story forward in time. What you just said about how people often say if addicts were to use as much energy and focus on doing something positive in the way that they do for the acquisition of drugs, it would be really extraordinary. But what I find even more extraordinary is the energy and focus that a person has to have to kick the habit. And that's what you did. And so talk to me about the point at which you decided you needed to do something about this and what your next move was.
So it all came to a head just under 6 years, and June the 19th this year, it'll be 6 years. And it was a conversation I had with a lady who was running a course that I was doing. And the essence of the conversation basically brought it home to me how bad life had got. And one of the things addiction does is it draws what can only be described as a fog around your life. And that fog skewers your vision, your abilities to see the effect that it's having on your life and the people around you. And getting clarity around how bad it had actually got, and then going to rehab for 2 weeks with my mind in the right place of wanting to tackle this and doing the first 3 steps of the 12-step program, which really brings home to you that you're powerless to your addiction, and it brings a greater level of clarity around how bad the problem's got. So it was really that conversation that was the catalyst for moving forward. And it was because I'd been to rehab before. I did a 12-week rehab program years before that. And the first day I got out, I started drinking again. I wasn't even remotely interested in giving up, really.
Wow.
So a big part of it is you've got to want to do it internally to make any form of change.
And in that conversation that you had with her, was there something really specific that she said to you that resonated so deeply with you that you realized this was the aha moment? Was it anything in particular that she said, or it was just you were having this conversation and the rest is history?
I think it was there wasn't any aha moment as such. It was just generally a realization. And after the conversation of mulling it all over in my head and sort of meditating on the ideas of what we discussed and sort of reflecting, if you like, on life, that's where it started to come together. So people ask me this all the time, what was the aha moment? And there wasn't one, really, is the honest answer. It was just I'd had enough for the last time. The conversation was the catalyst, and, the reflecting on looking at the current situation, it all came together perfectly.
Mm-hmm. And how long was it after that conversation that you were completely clean and knew that you weren't going back?
So that's a good question. I'm guessing it was probably a few months. It took a little bit of time to reach out and find Peter Davies, who was my counselor at the time. And yeah, so probably a few months between that, maybe a bit less. I can't recall exactly. But going to that rehab was eye-opening. It was exactly what I needed then and there to make the change, and yeah, there's something different it's almost like a switch in your head switches when you want to make a change. I mean, we've all experienced it in one way or another, I'm sure, throughout our life, whether it's diet or, whatever it is in our lives, we've all made changes. And there's a switch that flicks in your head, and there's a belief system that clicks into place, and all these sorts of things that allow you to say, right, enough is enough. Let's do this.
Got it. Now, at the point that you finally made that decision that you were going into rehab, you were serious about it, and you were going to come out clean, and that your life was going to be different. How long was it from the point that you came out of rehab to the point where your singular focus was on building a business for yourself that clearly has now become very successful?
Good question. So just trying to piece these years together. The problem with being an addict is the memory is not always the best for those sorts of years. I was running. I suppose it was about 3 to 4 years after I left rehab for the last time. The one that actually made a proper difference. And throughout that period, I tried a number of different things, working for other people and working for myself. And it was only, I say, in the 4th year or thereabouts, being clean, that what I do now sort of came to fruition, and in its present form, if you like.
And in terms of the work that you do around peak performance, how did you go from spending 3 years post rehab of kind of getting your sea legs, so to speak, and finding your way? How did you end up in what you're doing right now?
So what's really fascinating is I've always had a love for psychology, what makes a human being tick, what makes people do things, and almost more importantly, what makes people not do things. And that's been a current, underlying passion since I was probably about 15 or 16 when I first picked up my Tony Robbins book, walking in the woods, listening to his tapes, his CDs and things. So there's always been this huge curiosity for all subjects that affect the human being. So nutrition, exercise, and everything in between. So there's been this underlying passion there the whole time. But again, trying to build a business and being an addict, not a good combination. Trying to do loads of self-development and being an addict, not a good combination. So it was only really when I became free from all my addictions that I started to be able to implement a lot of the stuff that I had learned over the years, like meditation and all the things that I teach, my clients, and I do with myself on a daily basis. So it had always been there, just like entrepreneurship in some form or another had always been there. This love for the human experience and figuring out what makes people tick has always been there as well.
Oh, gosh, that's so beautiful. It strikes me as I'm reflecting on kind of the story of your life that you've shared with me. I'm thinking, you've gone through so many different experiences. You've done so many different jobs. You've had such a wide range of emotions around what was going on at home when you were young. And now you're into something that seems to have brought together all of your life experience in a way that can be really, really helpful to people. And given all of that experience, when a client comes to you to hopefully work with you, what is your understanding of them based on your own experience? Because it influences everything that we see in other people. There are things that are very familiar to us. And of all the people that you've worked with, have you seen common themes or commonalities among them that present themselves virtually all the time, where people are really struggling with very specific things, and you recognize them because you had those same struggles, which of course would be how it would make it possible for you to be empathetic and understanding and compassionate and ultimately help them.
Yeah, I think the underlying theme here is, or at least what my experience has taught me, is what it takes to make considerable change in your life, whether that's, being an entrepreneur, being an addict, or whatever. So I sort of have a radar, if you like, that can detect whether people are ready to make changes, because we all too often can say that we want to lose weight, or we want to, change our diet, or whatever it is, right? But actually saying that you want to and taking the consistent action that's required over time are two very different things.
Right.
So I would say that my experience has very much taught me to be able to have a look at, and when I don't work with everyone, I have an hour's conversation, which is just as much as them interviewing me as I am interviewing them, to find out whether they are ready or the right person to work with to make the changes, because ultimately change isn't easy. If it was easy, everyone would be doing everything that they wanted in life very effortlessly. But actually, to make anything, to build anything, and better than most, but to build any form of business or make any form of change in their life, it takes consistent action. It takes tenacity, which is one of my favorite words. Consistency and tenacity are two favorites. And it really does take something. And actually, like a lot of the sort of cliches say, that a lot of people want to live their dreams and get all sorts of things from their lives, but most people aren't willing to do the hard work and to do what it takes to make it happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that word, tenacity. And as you think about the clients that you've worked with, do you feel that one of the things that you help them with is enabling them to be more tenacious so that they can go and make the kind of change that's necessary for them to move forward, or to have what it is that they want, or to perform at a higher level, or whatever their goal is that they've come to you for help with?
Yeah, yes and no. I think there are certain strategies that you can put in place to allow yourself to win, and to allow yourself to, probably not to win, but to give yourself the best chance. But ultimately, it's got to come from within. If you want something, you go out and get it. And if you've got that type of drive, what I do very well is being able to give people the right strategies and tools for them that will work for them from a whole holistic approach. So it's not just about, setting up a strategy to go and be very productive, but it's also about looking at the human being and getting them to have loads of energy. It all comes back to energy for most of it. So yeah, I think it's incredibly important to be able to look at someone and see, what are they like? Where are they in their life? Talking about tenacity, the amount of times that I wanted to give up drugs was in the hundreds. The amount of times I tried was in the hundreds. And actually that takes a type of character, and not everyone has that. And yes, I think anyone can learn and change their personality, and I am living testament of that. But for some people, it's just not going to happen because they're not willing to put the work in. So it comes back to, when I select people I work with, I need to be sure that they are ready to make that change, and they are the type of person that is going to put efforts in. Now, does that mean that it goes effortlessly without any challenge, from start to finish? No, of course not. Anything worth doing in life is difficult in my eyes, or at least requires a lot of effort. So
I was just sitting here thinking about how, correct me if I'm wrong, but there seem to be two types of addicts out there in the world. And there are ones who are really committed to being addicts, and that often involves probably a history of drug addiction or alcohol abuse within the family, and that's what they grew up with, and there could be a certain predisposition toward it. And then other people who I think, like yourself, become addicts but they're not actually committed to being addicts. They're committed to the act of taking the drugs and going and getting them. But there is something about them that really makes them able to get themselves out of that situation. And I'm just wondering what you think it is about yourself and where it comes from that you were able to go through this extraordinary period of your life with the drug and alcohol addiction and manage to come out of it, because so many people don't. What sets you apart from other people?
It's a great question and something I pondered a lot over the years. And the honest answer
I'm sure.
Yeah, the honest answer is I don't know, because as you rightly point out, most people don't come back from a level of addiction that I went to. It either gets so bad that they end their life prematurely, or it reduces their life to almost nothing. I don't know is the honest answer. I suppose the conversation is about nature over nurture, and I'm a big believer that our experiences that we have growing up do very much, especially in our formative years and our early years, they do very much shape who we are. When we after we've grown up, after we've sort of done our childhood, and it's effectively the meaning that we attach to the experiences that we've had that really sort of live with us and flavor how we go about doing things in life. So to answer your question, I don't know is the answer. Why am I any different from any other person that could have gone on a very similar journey to me? I don't know. Why do I have the drive and the determination and tenacity that I do? I don't know. I suppose if you look at entrepreneurs, for example, you have some that are incredibly successful, and I know people that have done incredible things when it comes to business and built worldwide businesses turning over billions of pounds, and then you look at other entrepreneurs who haven't done anywhere near as much as that, who aspire to do that. So I don't know is the honest answer, and I wish I could give you a more definitive answer on that, and maybe one day I will, because it is a question that I do ponder on a lot. It's ultimately it's what makes us tick. Why, like I said earlier, I'm fascinated by why human beings do things, and almost more importantly, why human beings don't do certain things.
Right. And it's such a compelling question and personal inquiry, because if you could actually identify what is that thing about me that makes it possible for me to do the things that I do, it would almost be like you've discovered the origins of the universe or something, or the universe of yourself, so to speak, and how amazing that would be, because then you would know what you were tapping into and how to take more advantage of it. So, yeah, I think it's a really interesting question around, what is it that makes people tick? What is it? What are they operating? What is operating within them that enables them to do things that other people cannot do? What I wanted to circle back on one question, actually two, is if I may ask, during your addiction, was there ever a moment when you actually considered ending your life?
Multiple times, yeah.
Really? And what do you think stopped you from doing it?
Honestly, I didn't want to put the burden of the people that cared about me. I didn't ever want to leave my mum, for example, having to find me dead in a bath, or do you know what I mean? Or policemen coming around to my mum's door saying, "Oh, is this your son?" I think it's the love for the people that I cared about really that kept me in the game, if you like.
Right. And I love that answer so much, because when you think about what you went through and the fact that even through that whole drug-induced fog that you were living in for so long, the fact that there was something within you that was still operating in a very prominent way that gave you enough perspective on your actions that you actually were able to self-regulate just enough to make sure that you didn't do harm to yourself. And I love it so much that what is at the root of it is love, because that is the purest emotion that we have. And that was always operating within you. And I mean, as challenging as this period of your life was, the fact that the underlying theme for you seems to have always been love and has really, truly carried you forward in life, I believe, well into where you are today, because nothing motivates a person more than love.
Mm. Yeah, I'd agree.
So beautiful. And then I just wanted to touch on what you had said about the sensitivity to life at the point that you were coming out of the addiction and you'd made that decision, and how you're now re-engaging with life, both, you know, with your body and emotionally and psychologically. Can you just talk briefly about that, what that experience is like in feeling sensitive to life?
Okay, so I think that the scariest thing when you make that decision to leave that world behind is if you picture it this way, you imagine your life is totally devoted to one thing, taking drugs, drinking, that lifestyle. Mm-hmm. So there is no understanding of anything else. You wake up, your sole motivation is to get drugs, use drugs, do whatever you possibly can to make that happen, go to sleep, and then do it all over again. So the hardest realization for anyone that's giving up drugs and alcohol is trying to understand what life would be without them. Mm. So coupling that with this, I suppose the way to describe it is like an onion. You know, an onion has multiple layers, and you can peel these layers back. And over the years, more layers and more layers were put on this onion, i.e. myself, trying to hide away from the world. And a big part of rehab and personal development and everything that I've done over the years to keep me on the straight and narrow is about peeling those layers back to get to the truth and get to the reality of the situation, which is incredibly painful because you spent your entire fucking life trying to hide from them. You know,
isn't that the truth?
Yeah, you know, you spent over a decade trying to pile as many drugs on, as many layers on as possible to hide from this, and now you're telling me I've not only got to give up the one thing I love or the one things I love, and I've now also got to peel back these layers and get honest and get responsible. I mean, it's like, fucking, it sounds like a disaster. You know?
It certainly is not appealing and not something anyone would willingly choose.
No, far from it.
Oh my God, Nick. Oh geez, this has been so magnificent. Let me ask you one final question, and that would be, you know, what I'm thinking most about our conversation today is that for everyone in life, whether they're an entrepreneur or working for someone else, there is so much that goes on for us as human beings that, you know, we go through and we bring with us into the businesses that we create, the work that we do, the people we interact with, the relationships that we have. And it's really extraordinary to me that people are functioning out in the world as well as they do, because everyone has a story, and your story, everyone's story is extraordinary. I think yours is extraordinary, simply because of, you know, your origins and what you've gone through in your youth, and then on through addiction, on into creating a very successful entrepreneurial career for yourself. And I guess what I would ask you is, for the people who are listening, is there anything you would share with them about the journey that we all go through in life, that when you have a bit of perspective on it, how do you take what you've experienced and turn it into something really positive in the things that you're doing in the present?
Great question. I think the first thing is just honesty. Get really fucking honest with yourself and have that look into yourself internally and raise your level of awareness. And what I mean by that is simply just really taking a deep look at yourself and finding out the patterns and who you are and what's going on, and dropping the bullshit. You know, we carry around a lot of bullshit these days, and it's very easy to hang on to these masks that we create for ourselves and hang on to the ego and the ideas that we think society has that we should live by, and all these bullshit things that are just nonsense, frankly. And just letting go of that and just really being as authentic and as real as possible.
Oh, that's beautiful. Really beautiful. As we wrap up, Can you tell our listeners how they can reach you if they're interested in what it is that you do as a coach and other things that they can find out about you? Where can they reach you?
Great. Well, the first thing, if you're interested in looking to work with me as a coach, so go to nickelvery.com. That's where you'll find all the information about what I do as a coach. And on there there's a book a call button. And if you're the right sort of person, we can have a chat for 60 minutes and just talk through what it is you're looking to achieve with coaching, see if we're a right fit for each other, and go that way. So there's one option there. Also got the Daily Habits podcast, which is at dailyhabits.co.uk. So head over to that. You'll see all the latest podcasts, and the previous podcasts are on there. There's also an option to join the community. So one thing I'm really excited about is I'm creating an online community. So I have my one-to-one private coaching, but I also have a community I'm building, which is basically sharing a lot of the information that I teach my clients in a community-based idea. So having a Facebook group and loads of other resources around that. So if you're interested in that, we do a free 30 days for £1. So just pay £1 for 30 days. You join the community. If it's your thing and you like it, then it's £30 a month after that. If it's not, there's no obligation. You can just you can go on your merry way. So nickelvery.com and dailyhabits.co.uk.
And Nick, real quick, what is the name of your Facebook group for entrepreneurs?
It's called the Empowered Entrepreneurs.
Beautiful.
As I say, the way to get to it is go to dailyhabits.co.uk, and there's an image that's got the Empowered Entrepreneurs. You just click that; it'll take you to a page which has all the information about what it is. I can give you specific links if you want to put these in the show notes.
Nick, thank you so much for one of the most wonderful hours I've ever had talking with someone. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me on. It's been great.
And as I always end every show, I ask you to think about where you're at and what's your next move. I'm Arlene Battisil. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be back with another episode. Welcome to What's Your Next Move, the podcast for peak performers who are making things happen but are running into roadblocks that prevent them from getting what they want. Whether you work for someone else, you're an entrepreneur, thinking about starting your own business, or at a point in your life where you just can't make the move from where you are to where you want to go, you're in the right place. This podcast is all about answering one question: what's your next move? And helping you harness your power so your next move is the one that changes your life. I'm your host and resident provocateur, Arlene Battisil, and I want to know, what's your next move?